computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hello, sci-fi snackers! Welcome to episode 5 of season 2, which is episode 17 overall. Why I have this crazy counting system? Because I like to be difficult. I am so excited this week to talk to you about a cyberpunk story called A Notorious Intergalactic Criminal. First of all, chef's kiss to the title. I love a good title. This one was intriguing. It caught me right away. And cyberpunk is one of the more recognizable punk subgenres. So I wanted to explore it in a couple of different ways this season. And for this episode, I found an anthology that was edited by one of my favorite authors from season 1. So if you remember Anne LeBlanc, and her amazing mermaid space station, exploding station, 20,000 last meals on an exploding station. That was really succinct. And you know what? I'm going to keep it in here. I'm not going to cut that to make me sound like I knew what I was saying right up front, because that story just repeated itself over and over again. And it was this amazing story about what would you do if you knew that you were going to live your life over and over and over again at the end, and you were on a space station where there are 20,000 different restaurants that you could never eat at all of them. Well, now you can. And that is probably the story I think about most from season 1. If you have not listened to that episode, I will link it in the show notes, and you should definitely go listen to it after this one. And if you have listened to it, listen again. No, not really. But maybe go read the story again because it was so good. So all of this to say, I knew I wanted some more from Anne LeBlanc in season 2. So when I was doing my research, I found that Anne LeBlanc had edited an anthology called Embodied Exegesis, Transfeminine Cyberpunk Futures. And I was like, yes, I'm in, 100%. So I thought, wrongly, that Anne LeBlanc would have a story in this. No. So instead of reading another Anne LeBlanc story, I got to read a bunch of stories that Anne LeBlanc thought were amazing and picked for this and then edited and things like that. So I was still super into this. But when I'm looking at an anthology and I've got the table of contents open, I always scan it and look for titles that I think are cool. And I had read a little snippet that there was one story in here that had some sort of coffee robot appliance type thing. And I was like, ooh, that sounds like a really good fit for Sci-Fi Snacks, but I didn't know which story it was. And then I'm doing my scanning of the table of contents and I saw the title, A Notorious Intergalactic Criminal. And I was like, I don't care what that story is. I want it on my list. And how excited was I when I flipped to that page in my electronic flipping. So I scrolled to that page, I clicked to that page, and come to find out it was the coffee bot story thing. And so I was like, perfect. I'm going to have as my snack for this weird coffee story, a fancy coffee. And now I don't need an excuse to get myself fancy coffee. I have the whole setup at home. We have an espresso machine, we have the flavors, we do oat milk or whole milk. I love to make my personal coffee order, is currently, and this does change, but currently an Americano made with Brazilian coffee beans. That's very important. I've come to find out that I really am maybe getting a little snobby. I really like Brazilian coffee beans. So an Americano made with Brazilian coffee beans, and then adding heavy cream and some sort of fun flavor, because I don't do life without fun flavors. When I'm feeling basic, it's just vanilla, but lately I've been doing kind of a coconut almond mix, and it's been delightful. So I was like, it's not a special snack if it's the coffee that I have 4 times a week. So I went on a search and I found that Sonic had like a seasonal limited time offer coffee, iced coffee. And so I was like, great. It is pumpkin spice latte season. I will say that as an aside, but also that felt like a standard, like not something special, because I have that every year. Now, what I have not been able to find this year is apple spice or like apple pie type flavored coffees. I did hear a rumor that they are coming. Maybe it was Dunkin' is going to do some apple pie, apple spice flavored coffees. If you know, let me know. Hit me up on social media. Send me an email to sci-fi snackspod@gmail.com. Let me know where I can find my apple coffee this year, because as much as I am a basic white girl who loves her pumpkin spice, apple is superior. It is the superior fall flavor. Back to the coffee at Sonic. This special edition coffee was not like a fall flavor, but it was salted caramel toffee iced coffee. And I said, sounds great. So I tried that, and the flavor was really good. I will admit I liked the salted caramel. Sometimes salted caramel it just tastes extra sweet and there's no like depth to it or that butteriness, but this had a good flavor. It was weird that they had like toffee pieces in it though. So I was definitely chewing parts of my coffee at the end, which was weird. We'll talk more about that later. Right now, let's talk about A Notorious Intergalactic Criminal, written by Maya Dean. Maya Dean first retold the Iliad at the age of 6. Athena was the protagonist. All 6 pages were typed up on a Commodore 64. There were many spelling errors. She has only doubled down since then. A graduate of the University of Maryland and the Rutgers-Camden MFA, Maya lives with her fiancé of many years, their dear friend, and 2 cats named after gods. She is a trans woman, bisexual, and fond of spears, books, and jewelry. Aphrodite smiles upon her. I don't have an exact word count for this story, but it was about 30 pages on my Kindle, which I have no idea what that equals because I have my font adjusted and all of those things. Regardless to say, it took me maybe 30 minutes to read. So, not a super long story, not super short either. I know some people like to know that diving in. And as always, there are links to the stories this week and next week. The stories are part of anthologies, so they're not necessarily free to read online, but I would recommend reading them if you enjoy this conversation. So as I mentioned earlier, this week's genre is cyberpunk, and that's really common to a lot of people, but I still think it's important that we look at the genre definition as we move into this conversation so that I'm learning what these subgenres are and how they're different from each other. So the definition of cyberpunk is a genre of science fiction set in a lawless subculture of an oppressive society dominated by computer technology. But what's interesting is there is also a second definition that I found. Good old Merriam-Webster defines cyberpunk also as a person who accesses computer networks illicitly. So like a hacker, you could also call a cyberpunk. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense when you look at the word and like the compound word. And I just thought that that was really cool. And how many of our cyberpunk genre stories feature a cyberpunk character? like quite literally, someone who is a hacker or is a computer builder or something like that. This story is no exception. So, fair warning, this story was weird. There was a lot of times where I wasn't 100% sure what was going on, but I was along for this wild and wacky ride, and I'm going to give you the best summary that I can after reading it. We start this story with a human narrator. They very explicitly state in the first sentence, I am human. And then they start talking to you, the reader. But you, the reader, are the stand-in for this machine. So they are human, but you are a coffee drinking machine that we come to gather looks like a cisgender female, but is actually a transgender female coffee drinking machine that our narrator has created to spite God. We find out that we are living in this kind of lawless future, like we had talked about in the definition. And our main character is part of a corporation that is on this big spaceship. And the spaceships, when they were built to create coffee from interstellar dust. Ostensibly, as far as I can tell, because we like coffee. Now, that's the only reason. However, now these ships create far too much coffee to the point of absurdity where they will literally drown in coffee if they do not have these coffee drinking machines that process the coffee and get rid of it somehow. I'm not sure. That drink the coffee and get rid of it somehow. I don't know. I'm not sure if it was ever clear how these machines drink coffee constantly without ever stopping, but they do. And they get rid of it, and that is the basis of the story from the beginning. There are coffee machines drinking coffee so that everybody doesn't die from being drowned in coffee made from interstellar dust. Still with me? Good, because I'm confused, but it's okay. So we find out that this main character is on this search to try God for his crimes. And what is God's crime? God's crime is creating humans. And this is a crime because humans were created with such short lifespans and such drives to procreate and continue their species that they have become a menace to the rest of the universe, which is kind of more civilized with ostensibly longer lifespans and things like that. So we need to punish God for creating humans because they are a scourge on the galaxy and the universe and all of that. And I guess the humans are the ones who are going to capture and punish God. Now, what our main character says is that the main character has created their coffee machine to be a transgender coffee machine because that it's an ancient evil that God abhors. And if God can smell it, because God can smell this evil, God will come and it will be like a beacon and they will find God easier so that they can put God on trial. It sounds like the main character wants to kill God instead of putting God on trial. There's some infighting with the levels of management on the ship. We find out that our main character is poisoning some of the higher up people so that our main character can then take over, and that way the main character, when they find God, can kill God instead of just putting God on trial. It's all a little murky to me, but that's the general plot. And then accidentally, he ends up killing this commander before they actually find God, because they find somebody who, I cannot pronounce it, but it's instead of God, it's QOD instead of GOD. And it's like this nice man, and they realize, oh, big mistake. And then they're like, oh yeah, and we found like Rod and Wad and all of these other like variations on God. So that throws off the whole timeline, and then people are poisoned, and that ruins plans. And then in the end, they finally get to God. And the main character is freaking out because God does something super unexpected. God possesses one of them. And our main character has this like identifier that can like scan, and it'll tell you if God is there. And so all that he can tell is that God is nearby, and God has possessed someone in this landing party, which includes his coffee machine. And he's very confused. He can't figure it out. And he's poisoning everyone there. And then he's like, oh my gosh, no, like God has possessed me. I have to poison myself. And so he drinks the coffee and he's poisoning himself. And then he realizes everyone's dead. He's dying. And God didn't actually possess any of them. God possessed the coffee pot machine. And this man was so confused because he's like, but you think that this is evil. You think that this is something to abhor. Why would you possess the coffee pot? And then our main character dies. But the story's not over. The story has been sectioned off into like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Roman numeral kind of things. And then at the last section, we get this omega sign, which if you know omega, I am the alpha and the omega, that's like an indicator that it's God. And then we get the voice of God in the coffee machine. And God gives this little monologue about, welcome to my universe. What can I get for you? And talking about truth. And I am the Lord God of your coffee machine. And the end. Are you confused? Yeah, I was too, a little bit. But I will say this story was a wild ride. I had to, sometimes you read a story and you're like, what did I just read? Sometimes I'm pretty confident in what I've read and I know my thoughts and my feelings on it. And this one was odd to me because I was like, I enjoyed that whole story. Like on a line level, everything was awesome. It was intriguing. Each sentence made me want to read the next sentence. And then I got to the end and I was like, what was that? What was that absurd story? So in this case, I took a page out of the playbook of another amazing podcast. If you don't know this podcast and you love science fiction, check it out. Hugo Girl. They're amazing. It's a group of women and they read science fiction novels and they talk about them and it is amazing. But one of the things that they do that I really liked is they go to Goodreads, they go to Amazon, they go to the review sites, and they pick out different reviews and they talk about them as part of their podcast. And so for this, I was like, I need to see what other people are saying about this story. And so I did some searching and I wanted to share with you a review from Goodreads from Kat. And Kat said, talking about the anthology, but for me, the absolute standout was Maya Dean's A Notorious Intergalactic Criminal. It's about killing God, and also there's a transgender female coffee machine, and I'm not sure I understood a word of it, but boy, did I have fun. Yes, co-signed Kat from Goodreads. Yes, I'm not sure I understood everything, although the more that I talk about it and process it, I feel like I'm understanding things. But then it was still so absurd that maybe I'm getting it wrong. I don't know. And I think that there's definitely space for looking at stories with what was the authorial intent behind the story, but also reader response is a completely valid mode of criticism where it doesn't matter what the author meant. What matters is how readers experience it and how they respond to it and things like that. So we're not going to dive into all of the benefits and setbacks of literary criticism. This is a fun little snack hobby podcast, not a college course, but I will say that we're definitely approaching this one from a reader response lens of, I got what I got from it. And what I got from it was that I loved it. And I loved the weirdness of it. Everything felt unexpected. I kept reading because I was like, what else are you going to say? What absurd off the wall thing are we doing next? Okay, we're poisoning the commander. Cool. But the poison is slow acting and on a timeline and we have to reach God first, or our plan completely falls apart. Okay. And now we find God in a bar that's playing a jukebox set of songs specifically tailored to pull in God because of his personality that we assume he has. Okay. And then all of these wild, weird things that I think sometimes literature is seen as this really, really serious thing that we have to, I don't know, feel really sad, and that has to make logical sense every step of the way. That has to feel academic and rigorous and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes stories are just for fun. We've been running into that in the podcast before. Last season, we had some stories that I was like, this was just fun. This was pulpy and interesting. Well, this one was just weird and fun. And there's probably layers of meaning. And I think that I've explored a little bit into those layers of meaning, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this was just a weird, wild ride. And I think part of what contributes to that I really loved was voice. If you need an example of voice, if you're a writer and you're a young writer and you're like, but what is voice? Everyone is like, oh, you know it when you see it. And it can be really hard to parse out. Go read this story. From the first sentence, I am human. It's giving me voice of who this person is. First of all, it's talking to me, within the second sentence, it's saying, now you are these things. And my creator, your creator, I'm your creator, and this is my creator. And so we're getting this weird, mythology from the beginning in this voice, and it comes down to word choice and point of view choice and things like that. So I loved the voice of this. Something that's not on a technical level that I really liked was I like the trope of God as a corporeal person. And maybe this is the Catholic in me, God is three persons. And I grew up very involved in the church and reading all I could. And there were just certain things you didn't go there. And I think that I really like reading stories that to me as a young person would have been so taboo, talking about God and trying to trap him as if he were not this omniscient power that is everywhere, in control, puppet strings type thing. Reducing God to a corporeal person is interesting to me. I like to read those kinds of stories. I love to see how different people see what we refer to as God in our universe or in alternate universes or things like that. It's just so different from anything that I ever thought of growing up outside of this very Catholic view of God. So yeah, I was into it. I like to read that and see that. What I really learned from this story is something that you'll have to go look at the actual pages, is this story played with the formatting in terms of not the pages weren't formatted differently, but things like punctuation and capitalizing and things like that. It played with the idea of not using punctuation. And normally this is very confusing to me. I know there are, the names escape me right now, and somebody will probably say something and tell me who it was, but there are, E.E. Cummings does a lot with no capitalization. There are books where there is no punctuation at all, and those are all really interesting for choices. And this book didn't use no punctuation, but in sections where there was dialogue, there was a lack of punctuation. So quotation marks and things like that. And you could get it because they broke it out into paragraphs, and it was very skillfully done where that you never really lost the thread of who was supposedly talking. But what it reminded me of was I use dictation software a lot when I am writing because I find myself in places where it's easier to just do dictation, but also my brain runs a lot faster than I can type sometimes. So there are times where I feel like I just need to dictate this and get it down. Now, the software's gotten a lot better, but about a year ago, I would have to speak in the program that I was using, speak all my punctuation. So if I wanted to say a sentence like, "I'm really mad at you," she said, I would have to speak, open quote, "I'm really mad at you, comma, close quote, she said, period." And that's how I would have to say it for the software to do the punctuation correctly. Now, the software I've changed and there's some better options now that put punctuation in there. They capitalize for you and it's still not perfect, but it's a lot closer. But reading this story without any of the punctuation reminded me of when I did dictation to this machine. And if I didn't do it specifically where I was speaking the punctuation, there just wasn't any. It was just the words. And so I sat back and was like, that's brilliant. In this point of view, our narrator is speaking to this coffee machine. This whole story is this God-like elevated character because they have created the coffee machine who is speaking to it, being like, I am your creator. And we're getting the transcript of it from the coffee machine. And then when our narrator dies, we get the internal monologue from the coffee machine possessed by God. And that's all punctuated. Let me double check. I'm going to look at it. Yep, that's all punctuated perfectly because it's coming from inside the machine and going out. But all of the other sections are not punctuated. And I'm like, oh, it's like that dictation moment. And like, I have no idea if that was the intention. That's what I got from it. And I just thought it was so clever if that's what we were going for. Regardless, really cool prompt to think about how am I using formatting? How am I using punctuation? If I'm adhering to the standards, with standards in quotes, why am I doing that? Is it because I want it to just seem standard for whatever reason? I'm reading this book called Craft in the Real World, and it's philosophy heavy in the beginning because it's talking about this. One of the conversations is surrounding the saying that we have in writing circles of you have to know the rules to break the rules. And this book is challenging, well, who's making the rules in the first place? And what does it say that we have to abide by those rules? And it's a huge conversation. Like, if you're interested at all, get the book. It's been so good in a challenging way so far. But it made me think of this story because we break the rules set by a dominant culture. And this story is all about that underculture. And, you can't ignore the trans feminine themes in this story and in this anthology because it's quite literally in the title. So you're coming from this vulnerable subclass. And so we're breaking rules. And what is more breaking the rules than being transgender? You're breaking those gender norms. We're breaking the grammar and punctuation norms and looking at you and going, challenge it. It's different, but does that mean it's wrong? And I would say that this story shows that it can be different and right on all the layers. It is really cool. This is like light bulb, mind blow moments. Just such a cool use of craft to say more than what's just on the page in terms of the story. This is so cool. Tying it all back to this snack, this weird little story. I had this weird little snack. I said in the beginning, it was odd. The flavor was good, but it had toffee pieces and, you'd suck those up through the straw. And then I was chewing crunchy stuff with my coffee, and I was not a fan of the coffee. It was bad weird. The story was good weird. The coffee was bad weird. That's my connection. The end. I want to thank you guys. I have rambled far too much on this episode, but I want to thank you for sticking with me on this one. Next week, our story is Salvage by A.A. Medina. That's going to be linked in the show notes. All sorts of fun things. If you've never looked at the show notes, take a look. I've got all sorts of fun things linked in there. And reach out on social media. Have you read the story? What did you think about it? Do you like crunchy things in your coffee? Blech. I hope not. I hope you do have a wonderful week, though, and I will see you back here next week, same time, same place. Thanks for listening.